My husband and I joined this church, well, actually, we came to this church. We're like every other Unitarian Universalist that I know. I think we went to the church for like 4 or 5 years before we joined, but we started coming in 1995. And this church ordained me to the ministry in 2011. I went off and served congregations in Utah, Idaho, and California before coming back to Texas and serving as a resident hospital chaplain at Baylor downtown. And then I was called to a settled ministry at Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church in Carrollton. I left that ministry at the end of last year to have more time to spend with my family. And so I'd like to say that I'm semi-retired and I'm a professional grandma. And this part-time sabbatical ministry has been a gift that I hope you know has just filled my heart. So it is good to be here in my home congregation with you, and especially with you this morning in worship. If you want. So I do have to tell you that early on in my ministry, I was criticized by some for being too political in the pulpit. One of the leaders of the congregation advised that I explain from the pulpit that I was called to the ministry to do the work of social justice that Unitarian Universalism is known for. Only I wasn't called to the ministry because of the social justice work. I was called to be with people during their tender times, to hold their hand as they died, to listen to their grief and despair, to comfort them through tough times. I was called to the ministry from what is a very old-fashioned model, I think, now for ministers, to baptize, marry, and bury the members of the congregation. That lifespan doesn't really happen for ministers anymore in the congregation, but that's what called me, to be in caring relationship with those I served. I slogged through seminary and all the reading, the constantly contradicting theological interpretations. I longed to be of use. I longed for what I called the blood and bones of real life. I was not called to the ministry to be political. I was not called to the ministry to wear a collar under a yellow t-shirt, siding with love, standing on a street corner carrying a sign. I was not called to the ministry to save the world. Good thing, because it turns out that saving the world is an impossible task. In what she calls a severe critique of current attempts to increase activism by offering people more causes for hope, causes founded on false premises, author and activist Margaret Wheatley writes, "We did not save the world, and we can still be the best of human beings, generous, creative, and kind to one another." The goal doesn't have to be saving the world. The goal doesn't have to be the social justice work in some sort of monolithic, overwhelming boulder that crushes us. When we wake up to what is truly going on, bullets ripping apart 19 little bodies in Uvalde, threats to trans bodies, the impending decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, we wake up to being in the world just as it is. Sadness cannot be avoided. Sadness, felt deeply, opens our hearts to genuine compassion and love. Not being called to the ministry to participate in the social justice work Unitarian Universalism is known for, I was surprised to find myself consistently participating in the social justice work Unitarian Universalism is known for. Why? Well, at first it was because people invited me to participate. I have discovered that the longer I stay in ministry, who I serve gets a broader definition. Tender moments can be found in other places besides the deathbed or the sacred ritual. 8 years ago, I participated with more than 100 faith leaders and immigrant activists in an organized protest to call on President Obama to stop deportations immediately and to care for children at the border. 8 years ago. Yes, our immigration system has been broken for a really long time. We stood together in front of the White House, singing songs and refusing to move. During the action, I stood next to Antonio, a man from El Salvador. The risk I took was small compared to Antonio's. As an undocumented aspiring American, married to an American citizen and raising 2 American citizen children, Antonio's participation was, understatement, certainly more courageous than mine. In between singing and chanting, Antonio and I talked. He told me his story. It was a tender moment. The day after I listened to Antonio, the House of Representatives passed bills that fueled the already hate-filled rhetoric of the immigration reform us versus them debate in this country. This was 8 years ago in July of 2014. Back then, we said, stop deporting kids, moms, dads, workers, and members of our community. They said, no work permits for illegal aliens when 18 million Americans cannot find a full-time job. We said, granting work permits as part of deferred action is a critical step towards creating policies of dignity for working immigrants. They said, support policies that discourage illegal immigration. We said, we cannot allow thousands of refugee children to be put at risk of exploitation, trafficking, rape, and even death. They said, we oppose housing of illegal border crossers on the taxpayer's dime. That was 8 years ago. We did not get big results or large-scale change. We did not change the world. In some ways, the world got worse. Meg Wheatley is addressing climate change, but her critique could be generalized to many causes. She wants to honor those motivated by hope, but warns that a belief in humanity's ability to create change, and this is a quote from her, a belief in humanity's ability to create change oblivious to other causes and conditions is unconscious anthropocentrism, the unexamined arrogance that we are masters of the universe. She also critiques the myth of progress, the idea that things are always improving. If her critique sounds familiar to you, it might be because you have heard this same critique of liberal religion. This is the critique Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd offers in her book, After the Good News, Progressive Faith Beyond Optimism. It is a critique offered to all American progressive religions, but it is one very specifically leveled at us. We are the religion of the 19th century progressive theologian William Ellery Channing, who our youth are learning more about in Boston just this past week. We are the inheritors of that 19th century religion, where William Ellery Channing preached likeness to God, the ability of human nature to perfect itself, to become like God. Sin kept us from our inherent perfection, he preached. According to Channing, the work of the liberal church in the 19th century world was to provide opportunities for learning, prayer, and charitable acts. He preached this message to the economically privileged, white, merchant class people who sat in his pews. He was slow to embrace the abolition of slavery, and when he finally did, it was from a moderate place. Enslaved Africans were not included in Channing's vision of the human character's ability to improve. Although he eventually thought they should be freed, he did not consider enslaved Africans to be his equal. Those without access to the mostly middle-class leisure time activities to improve their souls were left out of progressive religion's purpose in the world. So now the liberal church in America finds itself at a crossroads. It is no longer enough to declare our good news as an opportunity to feel better about ourselves, to embrace the doctrine of the perfectibility of the human creature. It is not enough to just be awakened to the awareness of oneself as a developing being with unlimited potential. We can no longer assume there is a never-ending upward trajectory of history. We can no longer optimistically assume that our efforts alone will change the world. We must rely on something larger than our own efforts. We need to include those who have been left out of progressive religion's overly optimistic view of history. We need to listen to the stories of the oppressed and the marginalized and learn a more realistic view of history. Love can no longer be practiced in the abstract. We cannot love our neighbor without fully knowing our neighbor. We also cannot love our neighbor without fully knowing ourselves. Towards the end of the book, Reverend MacDonald Ladd tells the story of how she got into community organizing. She describes a program in Baltimore called Turnaround Tuesday. The program helps previously incarcerated and other unemployed citizens to re-enter the workforce and to become leaders in their communities. She writes about a visit to one of their meetings. She writes, "A smattering of organizers, pastors, parole officers, and community leaders were hanging around. A woman sitting near the front, whom we'll call Penny, volunteered to get the whole thing started. When she rose to read the statement of higher purpose the participants had agreed upon, she did it forcefully, without hesitation or a single break in her voice. 'Your misery is your ministry,' Penny said. 'Your pain is your purpose. Your suffering is your service. Your mess becomes your message. Your test becomes your testimony. God allows us to hurt, to heal others, because you cannot heal what you cannot feel. So don't let the pain of your past punish your present and paralyze your progress and purpose. Reverend MacDonald Ladd continues, that morning, I was reminded that it is not the liberal church that is the object of my highest commitment, but relationship itself, facilitated and amplified by the progressive congregation I serve. Relationship is my religion, through and through, and when a commitment to authentic relational engagement is present in liberal religion, then I am exactly where I belong. I grew up as an Episcopalian, so I often engage in some Christian practices as part of my spiritual life. This year, I engaged in a Lenten practice that included reading and journaling. I started my Lenten practice with an intention. By the way, I don't recommend starting a spiritual practice with an attachment to an intention. What do you do when you don't get what you want? Yeah. What I wanted was for the sadness of the last few years of my life to lift. We have lost so much. All of us, whether it be because of that pandemic or because of the usual tragedies that befall most of us. I am happy to report that the sadness is beginning to lift. And it wasn't the result of my Lenten practice. I have a colleague to thank for that. She introduced me to Margaret Meg Wheatley's essay. I was part of the team that hired Reverend John Lou Johnstone to serve as the worship leader and chaplain for our Southwest Unitarian Universalist Ministers Retreat we called Recalibrating the Heart. I don't know if you know this, but the pandemic has been particularly hard on ministers. We needed a space to rest and, well, recalibrate our hearts for ministry. We had given John Lou the instruction to take us from lament to hope in the 3 days we spent together. I know, 3 days to go from lament to hope is ridiculous, but it's all the time we had. Imagine our surprise when John Lou declined to leave us with hope, instead sharing Wheatley's essay that severely critiques hope as a drug that clouds our ability to face reality. In 3 days, we went from lament to love. We did not save the world. We didn't even save each other. But we did tell each other our stories. Preachers are taught to end the sermon with hope, to issue a call to action, to inspire involvement. I wasn't called to the ministry to do the work of social justice Unitarian Universalism is known for. I was called to be with people during their tender times. I am telling you, very tenderly, we will not save the world. The kind of common sense gun laws we really need may not be passed anytime soon. Those who are addicted to power may remain in power long enough to continue to threaten our rights. Roe v. Wade will probably be overturned. we will do the work anyway. Motivated by love, not hope. We will continue to do the work. May it be so, and amen.